My name is Hannah Miller. I am 39 years old. And on the day my 18-year-old son received a full scholarship to Stanford, and my entire family gathered to celebrate his future, my parents stood up from the dinner table and announced in front of 23 guests that I had never been their real daughter. But even that was not the most terrifying moment of that evening. The most terrifying thing happened a few hours later, when in a quiet office a senior lawyer placed a thick folder of documents in front of me and proved that my family had been hiding a multi-million-dollar inheritance from me for nearly 20 years. If anyone had told me that morning that by midnight I would stop considering myself my parents' daughter, lose my sister, and learn the truth about my past, I would have thought it was the plot of a cheap movie. But sometimes real life turns out to be much harsher than any fiction. The celebration was taking place at my parents' country house in a suburb of Denver. The house was big, beautiful, and perfect for family gatherings. My father was always proud of this house. He built it with his own hands 40 years ago, when he was just starting his construction company. This was where almost all the most important events of our family took place. Birthdays, weddings, graduations, anniversaries, and Christmas were celebrated here. This is where I grew up. This is where my younger sister, Laura, grew up. This is where the photographs used to stand, back when I still believed I was a part of this family. By that point, Noah had been receiving congratulations for several hours. He was happy. Truly happy. 18 years old, a full scholarship to one of the best universities in the country, excellent grades, and a future that many can only dream of. I looked at my son and felt that special pride that cannot be described in words. I had raised him alone for almost 7 years after my divorce. I worked 12 hours a day. Sometimes I fell asleep at the computer. Sometimes I saved on literally every little thing for myself. But that evening, all of it seemed worth it. Noah was laughing with his friends on the terrace. Relatives were raising their glasses. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate him. Even my parents looked pleased. At least, that's how it seemed to me then. To be honest, our relationship had stopped being close a long time ago. From the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. We called each other on holidays. We visited a few times a year. We smiled in family photos. But there had been no real closeness between us for many years. Since childhood, I felt a strange difference between myself and Laura. Laura was bought everything she wanted. I was lectured on the need to be independent. Laura's college was paid for. I took out loans and worked part-time in the evenings. When Laura started her first business and lost nearly $100,000, our parents covered all her debts. When I was going through a painful divorce, I was told that adults should solve their own problems. I never complained. Perhaps that is why it was so easy for them to take advantage of my patience for years. A week before the party, an event occurred that seemed completely insignificant at the time. A strange number called me. The man's voice sounded professional and calm. He introduced himself as a lawyer named Robert Clark. I assumed it was about some financial matter related to my work. But within a minute, I realized the conversation concerned me personally. "Miss Miller," he said, "I have been looking for you for almost 6 months." "What for?" There was a short pause. "It is about an inheritance." I even laughed. An inheritance sounded absurd. My parents were alive. All the relatives I knew were too. There was simply nowhere for me to get an inheritance from. But the lawyer wasn't laughing. "A woman named Evelyn Brooks left documents and a personal letter for you." The name meant nothing to me. Absolutely nothing. "You have the wrong person." "No, Miss Miller. I do not." I remember standing by my office window then, looking down at the parking lot. I was sure the conversation would end in a minute, but it lasted for almost 20. By the end of the call, the lawyer convinced me to come to his office after Noah's party. I didn't know then that this call would be the first stone of an avalanche that would destroy everything I considered my life. In the evening, the house was filled with people. Relatives sat at the large table. My parents, Laura and her husband, uncles, aunts, cousins, neighbors, old family friends. Noah was the center of attention. Everyone told stories about what a smart child he was, even in infancy. Father raised toasts. Mother wiped away tears of happiness. Laura smiled. An ideal family. An ideal evening. At least, that was the picture the guests saw. At around 9 o'clock, Father unexpectedly stood up from the table. I noticed that Mother looked tense. Very tense. Real panic could be read in her eyes, and her hands were shaking slightly. That was when I first felt a strange unease. As if something was wrong. As if someone was about to say something that shouldn't be said. Father tapped his fork against his glass. The guests gradually fell silent. I thought another toast in No's honor was about to be made. But instead, Father looked directly at me. And then he uttered a phrase that changed everything. Before this evening ends, there is a truth that Hannah must know. The room went silent. I felt everything inside me tighten. Mother lowered her eyes. Laura turned pale. And at that moment, I still didn't realize that they had known this truth for many years. They knew it, and deliberately hid it from me. Because if I had found out earlier, a very expensive family secret could have cost them several $1,000,000. For a few seconds, no one said a word. I looked at my father. My father looked at me. The guests glanced from one face to another, trying to understand what was happening. Noah sat next to me, looking bewildered. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I asked. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Father slowly put his glass on the table. Then he looked at Mother. She gave a barely noticeable nod. That was when I first realized that all of this was planned in advance. Not a spontaneous confession. Not an accidental conversation. They had prepared for this performance. "Hannah," Father said, "you need to know the truth. We can no longer hide it." Mother closed her eyes. Laura sat motionless. Too motionless, as if she already knew every next word. "What is happening?" I asked again. Father took a deep breath. "We are not your biological parents." It felt as if the air had vanished from the room. Several guests gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Noah turned sharply to me, and I just looked at the man I had called father for 39 years. And I didn't understand anything. "What?" That was the only word I could utter. "We adopted you when you were 2 years old." I thought I had misheard, because such things do not happen out of the blue. They do not happen at a dinner table. They do not happen in front of dozens of people. But Father continued to speak. Calmly. Casually. As if he were reading the weather forecast. "Your biological mother died in a car accident. We took you in after that." I looked at Mother. She still didn't raise her eyes. "Is it true?" For a few seconds, she was silent. Then she quietly replied, "Yes." Everything inside me collapsed. I felt as if the floor beneath my feet had suddenly disappeared. 39 years. 39 years of my life. And all this time, I was living inside a lie. "Why are you telling me this now?" Father quickly replied. "Because you have the right to know." Something in his voice felt wrong to me. Very wrong. There was no regret. There was no guilt. There was no pain. Just sheer tension, as if he were performing an unpleasant but forced duty. I slowly rose from the table. "No." Everyone looked at me. "No, that is not the reason. If you really wanted to tell me the truth, you would have done it 20 years ago. Or 10. Or at least yesterday. But not today. Not here. Not in front of all these people." Silence fell over the room. Father frowned. "You are overcomplicating things." I suddenly laughed. Nervously. Joylessly. Almost hysterically. "I am overcomplicating things?" Mother finally raised her eyes. And at that moment, I saw fear. Real fear. Not sadness. Not remorse. Fear, as if she was afraid of something much stronger than my anger. And then I remembered the lawyer's call. The inheritance. Evelyn Brooks, the woman I allegedly didn't know. A chill ran down my spine. Too many coincidences. Too many oddities. Too many questions. Who is Evelyn Brooks? Father froze. For just a second. But I noticed. And Mother noticed. And Laura noticed. And my son noticed too. Who is Evelyn Brooks? I repeated. Now no one answered. The silence was growing heavier. I turned to Mother. "Mom?" She turned pale. Truly pale. That was when I knew I had hit the target. "Hannah. Who is she?" Mother looked at Father. Father looked at Laura. Laura looked away. And that was enough. It suddenly became clear to me that all three of them knew the answer. All three of them, for many years. I pulled out my phone, found the lawyer's number, pressed call. He answered almost immediately. Miss Miller? Mr. Clark, I need a meeting, today. There was a short pause. Did they finally do it? Did they tell you? Yes. Then come over. I'll be waiting. Father stood up abruptly. Hannah, there is no need to go anywhere. I looked at him. For the first time in my life, I looked at him without trust. Without respect. Without the habit of seeing him as the person who is always right. Why? He didn't answer. That very moment became more important to me than everything else. Because innocent people explain. Guilty people try to stop the questions. I took my purse. Noah stood up with me. Mom, I'm coming with you. I nodded. No one stopped us. We walked out of the house under the gazes of the guests. Under the gazes of relatives. Under the gazes of people who just an hour ago considered this evening a celebration. When the door closed behind my back, I heard noise breaking out inside the house. Someone was demanding explanations. Someone was arguing. Someone was trying to calm the rest down. But I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I absolutely did not care what my family thought. 40 minutes later, we were sitting in Robert Clark's office. The small room on the 23rd floor of an office building looked too ordinary for a place where my life was supposed to fall apart. A thick folder lay on the table. Very thick. And when the lawyer placed it in front of me, I immediately understood one thing. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. A very long time. Before we begin, he said, I want to ask one question. I nodded. Did your parents just admit that they adopted you? I felt Noah tense up next to me. Yes. The lawyer sighed heavily. They were trying to get ahead of it. I gave them a strict ultimatum a week ago. Either they tell you the truth, or I come with the police. They decided to put on a show of being benefactors, so that you wouldn't dig any deeper. Then he opened the folder, and pulled out an old photograph of a young woman. When I saw her face, the blood froze in my veins. Because I was looking at my own reflection. Not literally, but close enough. The same eyes, the same face shape, the same smile. The woman in the photograph looked like she could be my mother. And that is exactly what she was. Her name was Karen Brooks, the lawyer said quietly. Your biological mother, Evelyn Brooks, is your late grandmother, who hired me to restore justice. I looked at the photograph and couldn't take my eyes off it. And then he uttered words that changed everything even more. And your mother Karen left you a fortune that you were supposed to receive 18 years ago. The room became so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. Excuse me? The lawyer opened the next document, placed it in front of me, and named an amount that my parents had hidden for nearly 2 decades, an amount because of which, fearing my investigation, they had decided to stage that cowardly confession, $4,280,000. And that was just the money, because the true value of the inheritance turned out to be much greater. The trial lasted nearly 11 months. 11 months of documents. 11 months of testimony. 11 months of truth being slowly dragged out from under layers of lies accumulated over decades. And the more we learned, the more terrifying the real story became. When I turned 21, the trust fund was indeed supposed to pass under my full control. All documents were ready. All notices were sent. All legal procedures were completed. Except for one detail. The letters never reached me. Because my parents received them. My biological mother, in a fatal mistake, had made them the sole trustees of the fund until my majority. And they took advantage of this, hiding the very existence of the money from me. Over the following years, they withdrew the money in parts. Through shell accounts. Through fictitious expenses. Through Laura's company. Through investment funds. Through dozens of different schemes. Each time they told themselves they would return the money later. Each time they found a new excuse. Each time they took a little more. Until they had spent almost all of it. On Laura's house. On her business. On her debts. On her travels. On her life. And the most painful part was not the money. It was that all of this was happening during the years when I was working 2 jobs, paying off student loans, raising my son alone after a divorce, and constantly hearing the same phrase, "We can't help, Hannah. Times are tough right now." Tough times. Every time I remembered those words, I felt sick. Because in those very days when I was counting my last dollars before paying the mortgage, my parents were spending the money intended for me on yet another dream of my sister's. The lawsuit destroyed the family completely. Some relatives tried to defend my parents. At first. But then the documents began to appear. Bank statements. Signatures. Correspondence. Internal reports. Recorded conversations. And defending them became impossible, especially after the lawyers discovered my biological mother's letter, a letter that should have been handed to me 18 years ago. My mother wrote it a few weeks before her death. She wrote about how much she loved me, how she dreamed of me having a happy life, how grateful she was to the Miller family for their willingness to take care of a little orphan, and she specifically asked them never to hide the truth from me. Never. When this letter was read in court, my adoptive mother wept. For the first time during the entire process. But even then, I felt no satisfaction, because some tears appeared too late. On the day of the ruling, the courtroom was packed with people. Relatives. Journalists. Neighbors. People who had been following this story for almost a year. I sat next to Noah. He was already studying at Stanford. Tall. Confident. Mature. And I suddenly realized that it was for him that I went through all of this. Not for the money, not for revenge, not for victory. For the sake of my son never seeing lies become the norm. The judge read the decision for nearly 40 minutes. When it was all over, my parents were found guilty of fraud, illegal trust management, concealment of inherited assets, and breach of fiduciary duties. Laura was found to be an accomplice. The court ordered them to pay compensation, sell part of their property, transfer the remaining assets, reimburse legal expenses. The total amount exceeded $6 million. When the judge finished speaking, there was absolute silence in the room. My father looked 10 years older. My mother sat with her head bowed. Laura was crying. But for the first time in many years, no one tried to make me feel guilty. Because facts have no pity. Facts simply exist. 2 weeks after the trial, Mother asked for a meeting. We met in a small cafe. For the first time in almost a year. She looked tired. Very tired. She was silent for a long time. Then she quietly said, "I really loved you." I looked at her. And I realized that I believed her. The problem lay elsewhere. Love without honesty sometimes becomes just as destructive as hatred. Then why? She closed her eyes. At first we just wanted to temporarily borrow from the fund to help Laura, and then return it. Then, it became too late. Then we were terrified to confess. And when that lawyer Clark threatened us with exposure right before Noah's party, we panicked. We decided to confess everything at the table, to paint ourselves as heroes who raised someone else's child, so that you would be moved and wouldn't listen to the lawyer. But the lie turned out to be too big. I nodded. It was an honest answer. Perhaps the most honest one in the last 20 years. But honesty does not undo consequences. We talked for almost an hour. Calmly. Without shouting. Without accusations. When the meeting ended, Mother cried. But I didn't, because I had mourned the loss of this family much earlier. Father never asked for forgiveness. Laura tried to contact me several times. I never replied once, not out of revenge. Simply because some doors must remain closed. 4 years after the trial, I stood on the Stanford campus next to Noah. He was receiving his bachelor's degree. Hundreds of students were taking pictures. Parents were hugging their children. An air of a new beginning filled the atmosphere. Noah looked at me and smiled. Do you know what the strangest thing about this whole story is? What? If they hadn't staged that circus at the party out of fear of the ultimatum, you would have come to the lawyer later, and maybe you would have pitied them. But they destroyed everything themselves. I laughed, because he was right. Their entire scheme collapsed precisely because of a pathetic attempt to maintain control. They wanted to manage the truth, but the truth never belongs to anyone. Sooner or later, it always finds its way out. We took a picture near the main university building. Then another one. And another. At some point I looked at my son and realized that I finally felt something I hadn't experienced in many years. Peace. True peace. Not because I won the lawsuit. Not because I got the money back. Not because I exposed the lie. But because I finally stopped looking for love from people who chose deception. My biological mother left me an inheritance. But the main inheritance turned out not to be the millions of dollars. The main inheritance turned out to be the truth. The truth about who I am. Where I came from. And why my whole life I felt like a stranger in the house I called my own. Sometimes people think that the most terrible losses are connected with money. They are wrong. The most terrible loss is trust. And the greatest wealth is the opportunity to live without lies. That is exactly what I received in the end. Not a new family, not an old family, but the freedom to never let anyone define my worth again. And if today I were asked whether I regret that evening when my parents revealed their secret in front of the whole family, I would answer honestly, no, because sometimes the worst day of your life turns out to be the first day of a truly free life. Thank you for reading this story to the end. All characters and events are fictional, created solely for entertainment purposes. Sometimes the strongest families collapse not because of the truth, but because of the lies they try to protect for too long. If this story touched you, and you want to read more gripping life dramas, both real and fictional tales of human destinies, secrets, and the strength of the spirit, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps these stories come out more often.